Welcome, I'm Rose Martin, and we are right around the corner in Roanoke, Virginia with Jim Sargent. Jim is a lover of World War II, a lover of history, and a lover of sports. He takes us on an adventure from Hawaii to Michigan, a little intrigue, a little baseball, a lot of history, and a lot of fun. So come join us. We're going to talk to Jim Sargent about his work right now. Hi, Jim. Welcome to Right Around the Corner.
Thank you. I'm kind of have a little fun with the idea of even being on Right Around the Corner.
Oh, well, we're so grateful to have you here. So I've got to know, you're from Michigan, and okay, full disclosure, you love sports. I'm an Ohio State fan. Ohio State, Michigan, okay.
Yeah, Michigan State.
Michigan State, all right. Well, that's still good.
Yeah.
So growing up, were you always fond of sports and history?
Well, history I liked in high school, but it wasn't really until I went to Flint Junior College, which is like in 58, 59, and 60. I avoided it because history was hard. It was fun in high school because we had a really good teacher, a guy named William Knutson, but I avoided it in junior college until I took the first class so I could graduate, won first half American history, and said, this is what I like.
And then you have a career, 40 years as a history teacher.
Yeah. On the college level, I taught 3 years in high school in Michigan, coached basketball and baseball. So I always worked sports into it somehow.
Yeah, well, and that makes it fun and interesting. Was sports always a passion for you?
Growing up, I think everybody played ball in the 50s. Maybe not really everybody, but played a lot of baseball, played football, and played basketball. Those were the three main sports. I never ran track, and you didn't see soccer much at that time.
Do you have a favorite between baseball, basketball, or football?
Well, I'd have to say it was baseball to play, but basketball was my favorite to coach.
And you've woven baseball not only through the books that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but you've also done several other books really focused on baseball. How come baseball turned out to be such a passion?
I wrote history articles, and my dissertation became a book about the New Deal in 1933, but my kids started playing t-ball around, I think it was 1989, 1990, and I saw a magazine called Old Time Baseball News, and I read it, and it was interesting because it was about not the current stuff, but about past stuff. And I said, I can do that. So I contacted the magazine and started doing it. So throughout the 90s and early 2000s, I interviewed former players, mostly baseball, some football, some basketball, even some hockey. I've talked to people like Gordie Howe, Merlin Olsen. I could name a whole raft of baseball players, but they're all people played in the 40s, 50s, or 60s.
And what did you do with those interviews?
I've still got them. I'm thinking about turning them over to in the case of the baseball ones, the Baseball Hall of Fame, so that other people could listen to players from that era talk about the game, what it meant to them, their experiences playing.
And they're icons, right? So did you have a fun interview, a few fun things that you thought, boy, I never knew that about this particular player?
Yeah, you always find that out. But I interviewed everybody from those who were virtually unknown. One guy, Bob Powell, I saw his name in the baseball encyclopedia, and I noticed he was from Flint. And he was a bonus rookie, as they called it in the middle of the 50s, but he only ever got put in a game twice as a pinch runner in a whole year and a half in the majors, believe it or not. For that, he was paid, I think it was $32,000.
Wow.
And then he spent some time in the minors trying to get back, but you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong manager, the wrong mix of players, and not go anywhere. Or it can be the right place. And you see different things, It's not, you don't always see the best players rising to the top. You have to have the opportunity. You have to have the skills that are needed, and you got to have the kind of grit that it takes to hang in there and do it.
Like the timing you talked about earlier.
Timing is important.
That might be so much with some of these professional athletes, that the timing of where you are, when you are, and seizing on that opportunity.
That's right, but if you could be an excellent quarterback, but if a team's already got a starting quarterback, you're going to end up being a backup. And
Now, did you play a particular position in baseball when you
first,
were
well,
growing up?
I'm left-handed, so started out playing the outfield because the left-handers can play the outfield. I learned to play first base, and they got me to pitching because there's not, I don't know if you know this or not, there's only about a tenth of people are left-handed. But there's never very many left-handed pitchers, especially, in the summer leagues or, in high school. You see them in the major leagues, but that's because the money's there.
Now, were you more interested in interviewing lefties then, the left-handed pitchers, when you were doing some of your research for some of your baseball books?
I never paid much attention to that.
Really?
It just,
Okay.
yeah, it just came out. The most famous left-hander, I guess I'd say I interviewed was Hal Newhouser, who was ended up being a Hall of Famer for the Detroit Tigers.
Were you a collector of baseball memorabilia, like the cards and the things that you'd get at the ballpark when you went to watch a game?
Well, I started it because, as I said, my kids started playing t-ball, Anna and Bob, around 1990, and they started collecting baseball cards. So I got a card of my all-time favorite player from high school in Detroit, which is Al Kaline.
Okay, and tell me about Al. Why is he your favorite?
If you grew up in Michigan in the 50s, you were a Tiger fan, maybe a Lion fan, but in terms of baseball, the Tigers, and he came along in 53 when I would have been in the 8th grade. He was a guy that came out of high school to the major leagues and made it. And you're thinking, I can do that. Without
that's
thinking
inspiring,
that
yeah.
he's got so much more talent than the rest of us that, well, the chance is there. But I think people identified with the fact that he came right out of high school to the major leagues because at the time they had a bonus policy where you had to be on the major league roster. I think it was for 2 years, but he was good enough. A fellow got injured in his second year and they put him in right field in 1954, and it was wonderful to go to Old Briggs Stadium, as it was called at the time, and see Kaline and the Tigers play. It was like I said, you're thinking, yeah, I can do this.
Did you ever try out?
I played in high school. I tried out. The Tigers had a tryout in Flint at Atwood Stadium once, and I thought I hit pretty well, but there's so many people that you just about have to be known as an outstanding high school player because they're going to check on all that. The odds of somebody that's unknown having the talent to make it are so slim that you might as well buy a lottery ticket.
But you still did it, right? And so that
Well, it
you
was
were
cool to do
inspired
it.
and you tried it, right?
It was cool to do it, and one guy that was there did make it with the Tigers, a guy named Steve Boris, came out of Flint, and he played with Tigers for several years and got traded somewhere else, but it can happen. I mean, lightning can strike is what it boils down to.
That's true. It certainly can. So you grew up in Michigan and you spent most of your time in Michigan. What brought you to this area?
The teaching job at Virginia Western Community College in 1977. When I finished grad school, I got a position at Clemson University, and I was there 5 years. Didn't get tenure because of lack of seniority. Spent 2 years in Muncie, Indiana at Ball State University, where they had a school for, it's a laboratory school they used to call them. I taught there for a couple of years, and a position opened up at Virginia Western. But I went to Flint Junior College. Community colleges are important. That opportunity, you got the opportunity to get the education without paying an arm and a leg for it.
You had mentioned earlier about being a Roosevelt scholar. Why did Roosevelt become the most important that you wanted to focus on?
When I was teaching in high school before I went to grad school, the part that I knew the least about was the 20th century, particularly 1900 to, let's say, present. So that when I got into it and started reading about Roosevelt and the New Deal, it's like, it's a real changing point in American history. Here's a guy that was crippled, but ended up representing the average person probably more than any other president ever. He was hugely popular. And the programs that came along, Social Security being just one of them, changed American history. There's no question about it, you know. I mean, you know, I'm happy that Roosevelt began Social Security in 1935 today.
Exactly, right?
He didn't think of direct deposit, but that's all.
Well, and when you think about 40 years teaching history, the number of lives that you've impacted, and maybe you've inspired others to be, you know, have that little spark of love of history or love of Roosevelt or love of a specific time period in history. And you've got a favorite, don't you, time period?
Well, it's the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 50s, really, to some extent the 60s. But yeah, when I got into Roosevelt, it's the New Deal. I researched, wrote articles about it, gave papers at professional organizations, and you get into World War II. The more you progress with Roosevelt, the more you realize that he meant so much to the country, not only the average person, but everybody really. I mean, he ended up being a major world leader, you know, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, but you had to have that leadership and to succeed during the Depression, and you had to have it during World War II, and he provided it.
How do you think you got the kids interested in, you know, your classes in the community college to say, you know, I want to know more about history? Because sometimes, as you said earlier, you know, you kind of passed it off and it wasn't that important, but it really is important that people know what happened.
I think you make it important because you're enthused about it. And I don't think you can say, hey, you need to, you know, really get into this. But if you're into it, they see it. And there'll be always some, you never reach everybody, but there'll always be some, hopefully a fair number, that will say, you know, once I get into this stuff is really pretty interesting. This is the way it was. This is how it happened. This is why it happened. If the old saying is, if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you learn from it.
Exactly. Is that why you chose to use this time period in the Mickey Mathews series?
Well, it's a time period that I knew the most about and was most familiar with. So, in fact, the number one subject that I enjoyed covering every year in the survey courses, and I once figured I taught about 8,000 people in Roanoke, but the number one subject, if I had to pick one out next to Roosevelt and the New Deal, was Pearl Harbor. So that was my first mystery novel that wasn't based. The first one was Curveball, which is a baseball novel set in the 1950s. But then I decided to pick a topic and create a protagonist, and I did. And the subject I felt most familiar with is Pearl Harbor. Actually, I think I read 4 more books while I was doing it and looked up all kinds of stuff. So I don't mean to tell you that I know everything there is to know about Pearl Harbor, but I was familiar with it because I covered it so many times from so many ways.
Well, and that research, that process is really fascinating for me. So I'm curious, you know, after being a history teacher for so many years, how did you go about looking to find some new information? And what process did you go through to gather your research and data to put these books together?
Well, the internet has changed the way people do research. I've been to the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park probably a half a dozen times over the years, but normally you'd go to a library and look things up. It used to be in the Reader's Guide, you know, and read this article, that article, find out about a book. I can sit at my desk and find out more on my desktop computer.
Isn't that something that we can just click and look and find anything we want to know?
Well, maybe not anything, but you can certainly find out what's been published on the subject. And my next best friend besides that is Amazon, because they're going to get the book to me in 2 days.
Right. Well, and it was interesting in your book, you talked about process in Final Secret, and I wondered if this was the process even that you used a little bit. A writer, whether of columns, books, or novels, is never really satisfied with his or her work. You place it aside for a time. If you're writing a novel, once the mind is clicking, you find new ideas keep popping up, but you never know when or where. Maybe you're at a ball game or at church or driving your car. And I'm wondering if you carried a pocket notebook to jot down like Mickey, or if that's the same kind of process that you use in your writing.
That's the same process. So I had Mickey say it.
Okay. Well, and then so the autobiographical part too, do you believe that writers often write about their own story in their books through fictional characters?
It has to be some of it. As I said, this topic I was most familiar with was Pearl Harbor. Mickey's a left-hander. I'm a left-hander. Mickey's a left-hander that bats right-handed. I'm a left-hander that batted right-handed. I can tell you how that works. Mm-hmm. I know how it works. I can describe how it works. But other than that, what he said is like, you get into this, you dig around, you read things, you figure it out, you make it work.
So that authenticity is important. Have you ever been to Hawaii? I noticed you take us to Hawaii, and those descriptions were beautiful. Carol, the co-producer, and I, we were talking about the fact that we felt like we were there, had from the pictures and of being to Hawaii. So have you been there?
No, but I want to go.
Okay. Well, you set us up beautifully. And, you talked about a little about Pearl Harbor, and I don't think I'll be giving anything away that there was an advance notice of the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Oh, that's no secret about that.
True. And so why did you decide to weave that in? And, for some people, I think it might be a secret that maybe people don't realize that there really was a little bit of advance notice.
Well,
or warning.
You have to realize that a lot of the top brass just didn't believe the Japanese could do it. They didn't think they could pull off an attack that big. They didn't think they'd be gutsy enough to do it. There's a writer named Hallett Abend, A-B-E-N-D. He has an article in the Saturday Evening Post in July 1941. I haven't looked this up, but I did read it. I didn't look it up before today. The title of the thing is, Yes, Japanese can fly airplanes. Mm-hmm. The average person is thinking, the U.S. military is so far superior to everybody in the world. We're going to walk over these people. Well, actually, the Germans had the best army in the world in 1941. Ours wasn't combat ready, and it couldn't be, but the Japanese had a real good army too, and they had 8 aircraft carriers they brought across the Pacific with a fleet of other ships and caught us totally by surprise, even though there were signs that things were going on. For example, their aircraft carriers disappeared a week before. Mm-hmm. Well, people in Washington, in intelligence are saying, where are their aircraft carriers? And we had 2 carriers that were out looking for them, but they took a route that we didn't suspect. They went further to the north and came down basically from a northerly direction on Hawaii, and we figured they'd have to come from the northwest. They figured we'd figure that was where they came, the route of Wake or Midway Island, so they went beyond that. Mm. It's like they just outthought us.
Well, and I was thinking while I was reading your book, you keep us in the first book in Hawaii, and you're taking us to Pearl Harbor, and then in the second book, in Long Pursuit, we find ourselves in Michigan, and
right.
Then we have the Nazi spies in Michigan, and the uncovering of that intrigue and the spies. Why did you bring us back then for the second part of the story to Michigan?
Well, partly because I went to Eastern Michigan, which was then called Michigan State Normal College, so that in Hawaii, the war was in effect over. But World War II goes on the home front. And actually, one of the equally important is the home front and war production. And I found out that right next to Ypsilanti was an actual bomber plant that manufactured B-24 bombers, which were critical to the war effort. I think something like 8,600 over the years. Well, there were threats of Nazi sabotage at a variety of places because the Germans understood that the U.S. in the long run would win the battle of war production, because they couldn't bomb us, but we could bomb them. You know, they were rebuilding their factories. I read somewhere years ago when I was, you know, researching the topic that 85% of the German war manufacturing was destroyed and rebuilt. I mean, it was like 2 days later, some factory would be operating that we thought was going to be obliterated after the bombs were dropped on. I mean, they were really amazing. Technologically, the Germans were as advanced as anybody.
Well, and the cast of characters that you have in this book, they all have very defined personalities. So I'm wondering if they come out of reality. Family members, friends?
Well, to some extent, but really I just did that for fun. My son Bob and his wife Amanda bought me this writer's kit after I had this first book published, and there's a little sign in there that says, "Don't stand too close, you may be written into the book." So I thought, that's an idea. I'll write some people into the book, you know. But you're inventing characters that serve a particular purpose. So you're always thinking of different ways and different kinds of characters, different kinds of backgrounds. And when you know somebody that doesn't mind, always ask the person. Because that really wouldn't be fair. Like Ken Edwards in Final Secret is my friend Ken Edwards, who was teaching at Virginia Western economics at the time. But there are some characters in Long Pursuit that are people that I know, some friends, some relatives. And it just kind of works out that way. It adds a little fun.
Yeah.
Part of it too. There's going to be some people that read it and say, "Look at that!
Look at, there I am." Would you be willing to read some for us?
Sure. What I'd like to do is read out of the Long Pursuit.
Okay.
And this is a section where Mickey and Frank and Tommy Jefferson are going to Ann Arbor. He's moving to a building where they think this German professor that's behind the blackmail and intrigue is located. Mickey moved to the second lighted window. It was raised a few inches, and he could hear a typewriter staccato hammering. The brown curtains were nearly closed, but there was a vertical slice of light where the ends didn't quite come together. Moving to the opening, he saw a brown-haired woman with wire-rimmed glasses and round reddish cheeks at her desk. She would type a few words, pause, and look again at a book at her right elbow, which was propped open with a ruler. Mickey shifted his weight, but when he did, his left foot stubbed a loose rock. He pulled back just as the woman looked up. Seeing nothing, she returned to her work. Ducking under the sill, Mickey moved past 3 darkened windows before reaching the last lighted office. The window was raised nearly a foot. The curtains were drawn back, and a pale glare from the fluorescent fixture overhead left an eerie oblong of light across the bushes. Before he reached the window, he could hear voices. A flat-sounding voice said, "What do you want next? That stupid reporter never published the story. Maybe she's talking big, huh?" A baritone voice spoke with authority. "Eric, we do not take any more chances. Understand? We have more important matters coming up at the plant. Several of our people are in place. If the female from Ypsilanti writes a story about me, she may have to face an accident." Baritone voice cleared his throat. "We mean to light up the sky at Willow Run. The less people who know what we're doing for the fatherland, the better off we are. Understood?" A fist crashed down heavily on the desk. Eric spoke instinctively. "Jawohl." Mickey edged closer, peeking with his left eye around the window's edge. The office had the same brown curtains as the woman's office a few doors away, but they were wide open. A good-sized man who looked to be in his mid-30s was seated behind a dark wooden desk in front of 2 bookcases overflowing with books of various colors and sizes. Mickey knew in a flash he was looking at Herman Fisher, John Paul Jones' blackmailer.
So Mickey has quite an adventure to finish out this book. Is there more for Mickey in this future? Is there another one?
Believe it or not, I have 4 more already written.
Wow.
And what I'm going to do this afternoon is put some touches on a plot that I'm working for on another one. So I just
Using
keep doing
Mickey
this.
as the main character.
Yeah, Mickey and Frank and their wives.
The band of friends.
Yeah, and this one's bringing back Tommy Jefferson because a lot of people liked him in this book.
We will look forward to that. Jim, thank you so much for sharing your work and your history and your love of baseball and your work at Virginia Western. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
It's been great having Jim. And I want to thank you for joining us. Please tell all of your friends about us and make sure to pick up Jim's books and learn all about the Mickey Mathews series and his love of baseball. I'm Rose Martin, and I'll see you next time right around the corner.
Production funding for Right Around the Corner provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Anne Ray Foundation, and by viewers like you. Thank you.